The mighty flame of the apocalypse burns once again.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review, and today we're gonna start off with the new set, the Heroic Evolution, and we're gonna kick off this new extra booster set, the very first set of Wave 2, with the set review with a focus on none other than Kagero, or better known as Overlord the Clan. And although Overlord the End is the main poster boy of this set, and especially for this clan, it isn't the only thing they got in this set, as they got the inclusion and the introduction of a very familiar and fan favorite face, that is Blademaster and his support unit. So without further ado, let's jump right into all these new cards, as there are some very interesting things to talk about, some overall support for Waterfall and generic stuff, as well as the new Blademaster and Overlord the End. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first cards. We're gonna start off this list, of course, with the generic stuff, and we of course got some reprints for the triggers. I'm gonna give them all 1 stars, as they aren't really that interesting. We already got them, we got them multiple times, so yeah, nothing really special about that. However, there is one interesting trigger, and that is the new crit trigger, Angry Horned Dragon, and unlike the other triggers, I'm gonna give this one 3 stars because it's a new trigger. So with the inclusion of this trigger, we can now start seeing different kind of builds, more than just a generic 8 crit, 4 heals, 4 draws. We can now see multiple crits, maybe 10, 12, maybe 12 crits, 4 heals. Maybe the drop G is gonna go out of some decks. So this new crit trigger is gonna open up a lot more deck playability and deck designing, and basically all kinds of different builds, because we now have more options and more things to choose from. Then of course, once again, we get a new starter. This is the Blademaster starter. Nothing really interesting about this card. I'm gonna give it 1 star, as it's just another reskin of the same thing we've seen time and time again. So yeah, not 1 star. Also a new concept introducing with Wave 2 is these new Grade 1 PGs. And overall, this is a more interesting one instead of the generic one that we've seen in Wave 1, because this one has an extra skill, and that's Auto and Vanguard Circle. When placed, draw a card and discard a card. So basically, when you write this thing, you can then cycle through your deck 1 card faster to maybe have ups the consistency. And this basically counterplays what the draw PG can do, as soon as it's a draw trigger, so it can draw you one. And the reason why I find this card a little bit more better, and also the reason why I'm gonna give it 3 stars, is because the fact that we now get multiple crit triggers, we might want to ditch out the draw PGs, so we want to run some normal PGs, and this is a lot better than the generic one that we've got from Wave 1. So I'm all for this one to open up some more deck designing and deck building options, so we can experiment with it. Also a new concept that's starting with Wave 2 are these new interesting generic vanilla cards. Now the first of these new vanillas is this Grade 1, and it's Thousand Strange Flames Peklenc, and it's basically a Grade 1 with an 8k, so what we all seen ever since the reboot, but it has the intercept ability instead of the boost. So this one cannot boost, but it can intercept. And the reason why I'm quite fond of this one, for Kagero at least, is the fact that Kagero doesn't really have a lot of draw power, so filling the board can be a bit problematic, and you want to rush your opponent a little bit harder in the early game, so they need to deal with your Vanguards on Grade 3. And this card basically enables that, as on turn 1 you can just slam it on the board, attack with it, and potentially also intercept with it when you need to defend. And the fact that it's an 8k means that even with a force marker it becomes 18k, so it still hits for magic numbers. So it basically enables you to do some early aggression plays without actually losing some defense value. So overall, pretty interesting Grade 1. Don't know if it's actually going to be run, but it's a pretty decent card, so that's why I give it 3 stars. Then the other vanilla card that we got was this Grade 2 Demonic Dragon Mage Keiten, and honestly it's a Grade 2 with 15k shield. It has the intercept, but it's only a 7k body. So yeah, it's not a great card. I won't give it 1 star. Basically, it gives you 5k shield more than 10k vanillas, but you sacrifice 3k power. That's not great. It doesn't make magic numbers when you call it to the rearguard circle, and the only value is to defend with it, but you sacrifice 3k power for 5k shield isn't really a good trade-off. And also, when you are forced to ride it, you cannot even hit your opponent's Vanguard even when you went first, because their grade 1 is probably an 8k and this is a 7k. So yeah, not great in my opinion. Then on to the cards with actual skills, and the first one we're going to talk about is this grade 2 Dragon Knight Mukhtar, and its skill is act on rearguard circle once per turn, counterblast 2, soul blast 1, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards, retire them, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So basically it's a bunch of skills tagged into one card, but you retain all the combined cost. It's not great. I'm just gonna give it 1 star. The reason why it's not great is it costs 2 counterblasts and a soul blast. That's a lot of cost, and yeah, you retire 2 cards and you get 5k power, but the fact that it doesn't cost so much means it's not flexible. When you only have 1 counterblast left, you cannot use the skill. When you have no soul, you cannot use the skill. When your opponent only have 1 rearguard, do you actually want to waste his entire resources just to retire the one and give this unit 5k power? No. You have better cards. You can have cards that are a bit cheaper and more flexible, so definitely a wasted card for that. So only 1 star. Then we've got this grade 2, and that's Dragon Knight Zarina, and its skill is auto on rearguard circle once per turn. When your opponent's rearguard is retired due to the effect of one of your Vanguard, cost soul blast 2, choose up to 1 grade 1 or lower card from a drop zone and call to the rearguard circle in the same column as this unit. So this is basically a recursion effect where you can recall grade 1 back to the field. But the fact that it costs 2 Soul Blasts is a bit heavy, as seen in Soul isn't really that easy to come by in Kagero, so it's very limited in that. The reason why the Overlord Searcher wasn't all that great in most people's opinion, is because of the 2 Soul Blasts. And this isn't nearly as powerful as that card, so this cannot be that great. And then also it needs to be relying on that your Vanguard is retiring something due to the effect. Makes it even more harder to get its skill condition off. What is the upside is that you can cycle your Ermos and your Dragon Newts, because those are really good grade 1s that retire themselves, and then you can get them back with this unit. So it has some good synergy with that. But currently its cost and its condition are super awkward and not really that great. So I'm only going to give it 2 stars, as it might be better in the future when we get a little bit more wiggle room with how we can use this card. The next up, we've got a very interesting grade 1, and that is Dragon Knight Nasser, and its skill is auto rearguard circle. When placed, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, cost Soul Blast 1, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, call up to 1 grade 3 from among them to the rearguard circle, and shuffle your deck. Overall, it's not that great, as most of your grade 3s are Vanguard centric and you want to have them onto the Vanguard circle, so the fact that you need to call it immediately might not make it really that great. However, it does have some synergies with some other cards in this set that makes it a little bit better. And yeah, the Soul Blast isn't that favorable, but it's manageable. So overall, I'm going to give it 2 stars. It's not an ideal card in most builds, but if you make the correct build with it, it can have some good synergy. And we're going to talk about those cards a little bit later in this video, but then you can see where the potential in this card lies. Then we've got a grade 2 that is going to synergize with the grade 1, and that's also going to synergize with the grade 3, and that's this one. That's Dragon Knight Fahim, and its skills continues the rearguard circle. During your turn, if you have a grade 3 rearguard, this unit gets power plus 10k, so basically it turns into 20k attacker, and it synergizes with the grade 1, as the grade 1 calls a rearguard, so you can enable the condition for this card, and together they will make a 28k column. So nothing really to sneeze at for almost no cost, just a Soul Blast, but you will also gain a rearguard. So it has some good synergy with that, but overall very limited, as you need to have a grade 3 rearguard. In most builds, you're not going to run this, as you're very unlikely to call grade 3 to the rearguard circles in most scenarios. So I'm only going to give it 1 star, as it doesn't really help you anything for Kagero. It's just generic power. It can work in a specific scenario, but most decks like Overlord and Waterfall have nothing with this card. Then we get to the grade 3 that basically is synergizing with the grade 1 and the grade 2 we just talked about, and that is Lava Blast Dragon. And this grade 3 has an interesting skill, as it is auto rearguard circle. At the end of the battle that it attacked Vanguard, cost put a Dragon Knight Fahim and a Dragon Knight Nasser from your rearguard circle into your soul, stand this unit, and it gets power plus 15k until the end of turn. So overall, I'm going to give it 1 star, and the only reason why I'm giving 1 star is it's very, very limited and restricted. You need to run the grade 2 and the grade 1, and you need to have them on the rearguard circle. This thing needs to be on the rearguard circle, and That's a lot of conditions in Kagero, which doesn't have a good draw power and synergy potential. So it might be really tough to make this condition come through. Then next up, we've got another grade 3, and that's Exile Dragon. And it's got 2 skills. And its first skill is act on Vanguard the Rearguard Circle once per turn, cost, counter +1, soul +1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So it's a little bit heavy on the cost side for just a single retire, but it is an act ability on the Vanguard as well as the Rearguard Circle, so you have more control over it, and that makes it a little bit better than most only single on-place effects. However, its value comes a little bit in its second skill, as that's on Rearguard Circle. At the end of the battle that attacked a Vanguard, if your opponent has no rearguards in the same column as this unit, you may return this unit to your hand. The reason why this actually is a pretty decent card is because of its second skill. You can just slam it onto the field when your opponent doesn't really have as much rearguards, and then attack with it and immediately bounce it back at the end of the turn. So you can have it maybe as a discard fodder, maybe as a extra card that you can put on guarding when you need to guard with 2 or more cards through some Battle Dore skills. It can also be that you secure your next right target as it has a force marker. There are some things that you can do with it, and the fact that it also has the extra retire skill can also make it work when your opponent has one rearguard in both columns, so you can just snipe one to be able to place it onto the field. And it's basically a good aggro/defensive tool, as even when your opponent has a defensive trigger, you can just attack with it and bounce it back to the hand to just have that extra card in your hand. So overall, very decent card, and I give it 3 stars because of its versatility. Not sure if a lot of people are gonna play the card, but at least it's a good tech card in maybe someone's build. Then we're gonna go over the support for the main archetypes, so basically Waterfall, Dragonic Overlord, and the new Blademaster. And for this set, we only get one specific card that actually synergizes really well with Waterfall, and that is this grade 1, Red Dive Griffin. And its skills, auto Rearguard Circle, once per turn, when your opponent's Guardian is placed from the battle, it boosted a Vanguard, cost, soul +1, choose one of those Guardians, retire it, and at the end of the battle, retire this unit. So basically, this is your booster for Waterfall to make the card even more hard to block, as when they're putting Guardians onto the Guardian Circle, you just Soul Blast it and snipe one of their highest defense triggers, maybe a heal trigger or a crit trigger, to make it even harder for them to guard. And the fact that it still attains its boosting power, it's just at the end of the battle that it retires, makes it a lot better, as it still ups Waterfall's numbers a little bit higher to make it even more tough to guard for your opponent. So it's probably gonna make Waterfall even more degenerate, and for that I'm gonna give it 3 stars, as it's probably only very useful in Waterfall for that sense. It might be used in some other builds, but I think it's just in the way how Waterfall works that this basically has a fit in that deck. Then next we're going to talk about the Blademaster support cards, and we're going to start it off with this grade 1, that is Wyvern Garan, and it got 2 skills. Its first one is continuous Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if your opponent has no rear guards, this unit gets power plus 5k. So it becomes a 13k attacker when you're going to aggro your opponent in the early game, where they're not going to call stuff. And also when you're using Blademaster, as it has a field wipe skill. Overall, that's a pretty decent skill, as it also forces your opponent to call more units to the field, to not enable you to have this power up, and it can leave them wide open for retire skill. So it has some good synergy with it. Then we also have the second skill, and that's Auto Rearguard Circle. When it attack boosted Wyvern Doha, that's a grade 2 for Blademaster, hits, cost, counter +1, draw a card, and soul charge 1. So we get an unhit draw for counter blast, that's pretty strong, but then also some soul charge. That's also really good, as soul is pretty tough to come by for Kagero. So overall, a pretty good, decent card, and I'm gonna give it 4 stars for that, as it synergizes a lot with everything surrounding it. Next up, we've got the grade 2 for Blademaster, and that's Wyvern Doha, and it also got 2 skills. Its first one is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed from hand, cost, counter +1, search your deck up to 1 Wyvern Garan, call to the Rearguard Circle, and shuffle your deck. So basically, it has the Akane skill, but then for Kagero. That's pretty big, as I stated before in this video, Kagero has some issues filling the field, and this card basically is gonna fix that a little bit, and it calls a good grade 1. So overall, pretty decent card. Then we also got a second skill, and that is continuous Rearguard Circle. During the battle that it attacked, if your opponent has no rearguard, your opponent cannot call normal units from his or her hand to the Guardian Circle. Basically a Silent Hum effect in Force Clan on a 9k grade 2, that calls out the grade 1 booster that can potentially boost this thing, and that makes it a 22k column. overall pretty decent. It is a strong column, but it also has some other synergy, and the fact that you have an Akane skill in Kagero is very strong, and for that I'm gonna give it 4 stars. And the reason we're gonna 4 stars is the 9k body is a little bit wonky. Yes, it makes some good synergy, but the fact that there are some things that it relies on. I mean, the main power of this card also comes out when your opponent's field is empty. It's only happening in some specific builds, and that makes the card a little bit more depending on what we've got. And with Waterfall and Overlord, that's probably not going to happen all that much, but with Blademaster, quite some time. So yeah, 4 stars for that, definitely. Then next up, we've got a great one that synergizes really well with Blademaster, and it's Wyvern Strike Mambas. And its skill is on a rearguard circle. When it boosts, if your opponent has no rear guards, until the end of battle, when an opponent would call a card from his or her hand to the guardian circle, he or she must call 2 or more at the same time. So it's a battle door effect on a grade 1 that's boosting when your opponent's field is empty. That's pretty strong, but we can see some insane synergy with the card we just talked about, the grade 2, as together they make a 17k column. That's basically guardable by anybody with 1 or 2 cards, and that's our low card. So for 2 5s or maybe 1 10, you're enough, or 2 intercept. But both of their skills activate when your opponent's field is empty, so they cannot intercept. And then the grade 2 skill kicks in, and it can only guard with non-normal units, so only with a protect marker or with triggers. And that means they are either forced to put a protect marker and discard basically 2 cards, or they are forced to put 2 triggers onto a 17k attack. That's pretty heavy overguarding in most scenarios. So this has some strong synergies with that card, even though the tech might look weak. But besides that, there aren't really that amazing synergies with the card, as it's once again reliant on an empty field, and probably only Blademaster can do that, and it only happens pretty late in the game. So for that, I'm only gonna give it 3 stars, as it does some work for the clan, but not major stuff in general. Then next we've got another support card for Blademaster, and that's this grade 3, and that's Shine Bardiche Dragon. And its skills, auto and Vanguard the rearguard circle, when placed, cost Soul Blast 1, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 Dragonic Blademaster from among them, and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it's a Dragonic Blademaster searcher that works on Vanguard as well as rearguard circle. And it's pretty good, as seeing as Blademaster is gonna need a grade 3 in the soul. So if you can write this thing first, and it does have the force marker, so it's a good right target, you can potentially secure your Blademaster to then go into basically this thing. And if you were forced to write Blademaster first, and you have this one then in your hand, you can call it and potentially fix your next upright to a second Blademaster. So it helps with the consistency of the deck, and it makes it a pretty solid grade 3, and I'll give it 3 stars for that. But as I talked before with the grade 1 that basically searches a grade 3 from the top of the deck and then calls it, you can then chain that one into this one that then can get you a Blademaster hand. It does cost you 2 soul, but you get 2 cards. So overall, it has some interesting synergies, and it can make some weird combos work. So overall, pretty interesting to think about what the potentials are, and that's why definitely a solid 3-star support card for Blademaster. But now that we talked about all the support cards for Blademaster, let's take a look at the big guy himself. So the grade 3, Dragonic Blademaster. It gets 2 skills, and its first one is Continuous Vanguard Circle. If your opponent has no rear guards, this unit gets power plus 5k and critical plus 1. So once again, a skill that works when your opponent's field is empty. So we've seen a lot. The grade 1, the grade 2, another grade 1. So how do we get our opponent's field empty? Well, we do it with its second skill, and that's Act on Vanguard Circle once per turn. If Wyvern Strike Doha and Wyvern Strike Garan are on the rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast 1 grade 3 and discard 2 cards from your hand. Retire all of your opponent's rear guards, call a Vision token to the rearguard circle, and until the end of the turn, retire it. A Vision token is a grade 3 with power of 13k, critical 1, and it can Twin Drive on the rearguard circle. So basically the 2 cards that you discard are gonna come back in a Twin Drive. So you can have Twin Drive and Twin Drive again with your Vanguard. That's a lot of power for not really that much cost. And if your opponent had a full field, you just minusing them for crazy amounts. So in my opinion, this is a very strong card, and I'm definitely gonna give it 5 stars. And I'm just happy to see that Blademaster is back, and this form of Blademaster is really solid. And I've seen some very interesting things about the card. And overall, there's also a great shenanigan combo that you can do in Premium, as you can make the Vision token, and in Premium you have stand triggers, and stand triggers restand rear guards, and the Vision token is a rear guard with Twin Drive, and a Twin Drive doesn't stop. So whenever you can restand that rear guard, you will have another Twin Drive, and if you run 12 or 16 stand triggers, you can attack a couple of times with that thing. So yeah, great stuff. So now we're gonna go to the last cards for the set, and that's basically the support card for Overlord the End and Overlord the End himself. And these are basically the big boss cards for the deck. First off, I'm gonna talk about is the grade 2, and that's Wyvern Strike Dekat. And it gets 1 skill, active rearguard circle, cost, counted as 1, and put this unit into your soul. Choose one of your Dragonic Overlord the End, and when your opponent would call a card from his or her hand to the Guardian Circle, for the battles that the unit attacked this turn, he or she must call 2 or more at the same time. So basically, you give your Battle Door effect to your Vanguard for each and every battle that it's gonna attack. And as you're going to see, Overlord is gonna attack a couple of times, so you get a lot of value out of this card. But it does sound bad for this card that you need to do it in the main phase and put it into your soul, so you're not going to get some value out of this card. However, this actually synergizes really well with Overlord the End, as you want to go a little bit minusing your hand to get some more value out of it. So overall, it is a solid card, and for that I'm going to give it 4 stars, as it synergizes with a boss monster that is really potent. And the fact that you need to put 2 cards onto the field every single time it attacks is gonna rank up, especially if you're against a Protect line that wants to perfect guard your Vanguard attacks. So it can be really deadly. But to get a better picture of how good the grade 2 is, let's take a look at Dragonic Overlord the End to see how strong this card can be. So the grade 3, the boss monster, the VR of this set, Dragonic Overlord the End. It only got 1 skill, but it's divided into sections, as its skill is auto on Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle that it attacked, activate one of the effects below, but you cannot activate the same effect for the same turn. If your hand has 4 or less cards, cost, count plus 1 and soul plus 1. Stand this unit and it gets drive -1 until the end of turn. The second point is, if your soul has a card with Overlord in its card name, cost, discard 3 cards from your hand, stand this unit, and it gets power plus 10k and drive -1 until the end of turn. So basically, you can restand him twice and attack for 3 times. So if you have the grade 2 attached on top of this thing, you have 3 attacks which your opponent needs to waste at least 6 cards or 9 cards if they only have perfect guards to guard against. That's a lot of cards out of your opponent's hand without even guarding against your rear guards that are still standing at this point. But then when we look at the skills, his first effect is that you need to have 4 cards or less. This sounds bad, but at the same time, you don't discard for this restand. So you're R+ing on this one. And what it does synergize with is the grade 2, for example. You put a card from your hand onto the field, then give your Vanguard an effect, and then you can restand it without discarding a card from your hand. But also, it synergizes with the lack of what Kagero has, and that's early game pressure. You don't really want to put cards onto the field early game. Now, thanks to this skill, you might be incented to do that and maybe run a lot of cards that aren't with just on place effect, more about act abilities, so you have maybe some benefit later on. But you can just dump your hand onto the field in most scenarios, or just overguard early game to get this skill live on your first ride, because you don't have to do anything for it. You don't have to rewrite, don't have to Soul Blast a grade 3. It can be your first ride target, and in that sense, it can be better than the OG Overlord. But then we get to its second skill, and that is basically a way to power up Overlord himself to attack for 23 or 33 or maybe 43, depending on how many force markers you put onto the thing. And then you can rank up the amount of damage, because then you attack it, stand it once again, and it retains the plus 10k if you are in the late stages of the game. And the reason that it only asks for an Overlord means that you can either run the OG or the Great, or just both with this card. And this card has a lot of in-depth strategies that you can play. You can more play the defensive style and then go into this thing and then unleash a lot of power, or just go ham on turn 1. And with Force 1 and Force 2 in the mix, you can even give all these attacks a plus critical, so each attack will attack for 2 criticals, and combined with the grade 2, they need to waste a lot of guards even early on, because otherwise the damage is gonna go up way too fast for a lot of decks. So there are some very powerful synergies that you can do with even the new markers in the mix. So overall, definitely 5-star card for me, as it's a very powerful card. Artwork is amazing, and it just allows for a lot of different playability and strategies for Kagero, which it didn't have that much in the beginning of the reboot, and this is gonna make up for a lot of it, especially together with the Great. And with this set, we've seen a lot of new interesting things. We saw the obvious support for Waterfall and Overlord, but we also saw some generic interesting stuff with the Great 1, 2, and 3 that work together to make a restanding rearguards. Very interesting mechanic in that sense, and also the introduction of the new Blademaster cards and the Blademaster mechanic with the vision token. It's really interesting. In premium, it's pretty nuts how it can work, and there also are very interesting playability even with standards, with the whole field wipe and all the extra pressure you get while playing in all these new cards that get benefit from that. So overall, Kagero is looking pretty solid with all this new support. I'm very excited once we get all these cards in the English release, as Kagero is looking pretty damn good after this set, with all these new little toys that they can use to play and build all kinds of different strategies. Because after this point, in my opinion, there isn't really one strategy that is the main strategy. There are now endless ways that you can play the deck, and they are all equally pretty good in their own rights against certain matchups. But that's basically everything for this set review. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards that Kagero basically got access to with the Heroic Evolution. Are you excited for the new Blademaster introducing into Standard? Maybe with that prospect we get some other G-era main key units. Maybe we get Chrono Chat, for example. Would be amazing though. But let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below about these new Kagero cards. And basically with that, I'm going to end this video. As always, I want to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting this channel and making this video possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel and all the content that I'm creating to make possible for you guys, then head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one.